Virginia Fox and Ranking Member Bobby Scott from the Committee on Education and Workforce. Dr. Scott, I welcome your testimony.
I think she meant Dr. Fox.
Well, you know, you technically are a doctor as a lawyer, so, but actually, in this case, Dr. Fox is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sure Congressman Scott's gotten a doctorate degree from somebody.
A law degree.
A lot of them, he got his law degree, so
That's
that
a JD.
That's right, JD, there you go. HRES 461 is a resolution that expresses a sense of Congress that K-12 public school facilities should not be used to house migrants. That this bill is before the Rules Committee says two things about the priorities of this new House majority. First, we'll fight against open border policies. Second, we'll fight against policies that endanger our nation's children. The border is wide open. In April of 2020, under the Trump presidency, there were 17,106 migrant encounters with enforcement officers at our southwest border. In April 2023, under the Biden presidency, there were 211,401 migrant encounters with enforcement officers at our southwest border. The astronomical increase can be explained only by Biden's relaxing, revoking, and reversing of the strong border policies of the last administration. Biden's policies effectively send a message to cartels. Our border is open for you to traffic migrants, terrorists, and fentanyl. That leads me to the second priority, children. Open border policies are dangerous. It's bad enough that the leading cause of death for adults under 45 is now a fentanyl overdose because of a wide open southern border. We shouldn't let Democrats also endanger young children by forcing them to share gymnasiums with unidentified migrants. In New York City, Mayor Eric Adams planned to house migrants in up to 20 current and former public school gymnasiums. In New York State, Governor Kathy Hochul is similarly enthusiastic about housing migrants at education facilities. And we know that public schools did, in fact, carry out these plans. CNN, CBS, and the New York Post have all uncovered instances of New York public schools already harboring migrants. For every migrant housed in school facilities using taxpayer dollars, precious resources, time, and attention are diverted from our nation's school children. This bill sends a clear message to blue state governors and blue state mayors. It's an injustice, it's dangerous, and we won't stand for it. With that, I urge the passage of HRES 461, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Ranking Member Scott, you're recognized for your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ranking Member McGovern, members of the committee, I rise in opposition of HRES 461. It's frustrating that we're taking up another proposal that, among other things, purports to improve school safety, but does nothing to address gun violence in schools or improve students' mental health. In fact, so far this Congress, House Republican priorities for K through 12 education have focused almost entirely on culture wars. We have passed legislation to ban books. The House advanced legislation seeking to bar trans students from participating in sports. Now the Education and Workforce Committee has reported a proposal that condemns the use of school facilities to temporarily house immigrants. I didn't know that our committee had jurisdiction over immigration policy, but I guess here goes. Resolution further takes the extreme stance of suggesting that schools that house immigrants should be ineligible to receive federal funds. This resolution also falsely implies that temporarily using school facilities to house immigrants leads to learning loss. There's been no evidence to support that claim. Addressing learning loss and helping students make up for lost time in the classroom required us to make historic investments in schools' abilities to offer after-school, summer, and mentorship programs like we did 2 years ago in the American Rescue Plan Act. But we can't continue to meaningfully address learning loss and meet students' mental health needs if we're talking about taking all federal funds away from schools that do not adhere to the Republicans' agenda. And as far as school safety goes, we can't protect school safety without addressing gun violence. This resolution does not mention the reality that gun violence poses the greatest threat to our children's safety. This year alone, we've seen more than 20 school shootings across the country, and according to the Kaiser Foundation, guns are the leading cause of death among children and teens. Any conversation about school safety, therefore, that does not meaningfully address gun violence is not a serious conversation. If we want to talk about learning loss, we should be talking about evidence-based strategies that meet the needs of our students. If my colleagues want to keep students safe, we should be confronting what is actually killing them. Parents, teachers, and students are demanding that we take meaningful action on gun violence, yet we have not budged. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle have not budged on that issue. Reality is that HRES 461 does not address the real issues confronting our students today, and that is gun violence and helping to address learning loss, and therefore, I strongly urge my colleagues to oppose the resolution.
Thank you for testimony. The chair has no questions at this time. Dr. Burgess, you're recognized for any questions you may care to address the panel.
Well, thank you. You know, President Biden, when he was running for office, suggested that there's no reason why the United States could not take in an additional 2 million people a year in our system. Well, I think we've proved the point that, well, he doubled the number. And guess what? We got a real problem. We got a real problem with a lot of our smaller school districts, I know in Texas. The numbers of English as second language kids, the number of kids who are admitted behind grade level, it's overwhelming, these small school districts. So while I welcome this legislation today, I think it's timely, it's necessary. I will just tell you, I have been frustrated by Secretary Becerra, by Secretary Mayorkas, when you ask them, when they come into committee to give the hearings on the budget, on what they're projecting, and you ask them, what are you doing to prepare small communities, small school districts for what is headed their way? That the president said he wanted to bring their way. He said he wanted 2 million, he got 4. How in the world are you preparing these communities and these school districts for what is headed their way? Doesn't have much to do with the bill we've got in front of us today. I think the bill's a good idea. We should prohibit this activity, but the larger issue is, what are we doing to our smaller school districts and overwhelming them with a problem that should be controlled by the federal government at the border? And I'll be happy to hear from either of you on that.
Well, I will make just one quick observation. When I was first elected to Congress, I met with the superintendent of our largest county and largest school district in my district, and he told me that for several years, the only growth that they were having in the number of children coming into the schools was with children who had English as a second language. And so almost all the growth occurring, all the cost were coming from migrant children. And that's just gotten worse and worse and worse over the years. And it's particularly gotten really bad under the Biden administration. We all know that President Biden campaigned on an open border. And as you say, he's been, in one case, more successful than he wanted to be by doubling the number of people who've come in illegally. It's wrong. A border is important to have for any country. None of us could go to another country anywhere without permission from that country to come in. It just won't happen. And so we're not operating the way a country should be operating, which is with a border. You know, my father's parents came here in the early 1900s. They came through Ellis Island. They came through legally. My mother's ancestors have been here since the 1700s. So, you know, I'm a granddaughter of migrants on my father's side, and so I'm a believer in migration. We admit over 1 million people each year legally. I've talked to many of those people. They pay a lot of money. They spend a lot of time. Sometimes it takes 15, 20 years for them to go through the process. That's the way it ought to be. We're the greatest country in the world. People want to come here. I understand that. I understand they're human beings, Mr. McGovern, and I understand why they would want to come here. But to maintain this as the greatest country in the world, we have to follow the rules. If we let our rules go, if we become an anarchy, like some of these other countries, then we won't be the place people want to come or the place people want to grow up in. So thank you very much for letting me preach that little sermon. Thank you.
I'd just say that if you want to talk immigration policy, you need to talk to people in Homeland Security and Judiciary Committee. I know that schools have, talking about the bill before us, schools are traditionally used in emergencies, hurricanes and whatnot without any fanfare. Taking money away from the school districts, as this bill does, cannot be helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Distinguished ranking members recognized for any questions he may have.
Well, thank you. This has been an interesting conversation that's gone on, Dr. Fox and Dr. Burgess, but I'm trying to think about what it has to do with the bill before us. General immigration policy, what you feel about more migration, I mean, that's one thing, but that's not what this bill is dealing with. This is dealing with a specific issue about housing migrants in gymnasiums in schools. And so the conversation my friends just had was interesting, but it doesn't seem to relate to the bill that we're dealing with. I'm trying to understand what this bill does. Dr. Fox, does this bill have the force of law?
Mr. McGovern, you know what an HJ-Res does.
I do, but I just want to make sure you did.
It's a sense of Congress.
Right. Yeah, so it's our opinion, but it does. I mean, I think you mentioned we need to shut this practice down. This bill doesn't do that. It's the opinion of those who vote for it. Am I correct?
That's right.
All right.
It lets people know where we stand
Right.
on an issue.
And I'm just trying to understand how many gymnasiums in New York City or New York State are currently housing migrants right now?
My understanding is it was 20 or so.
Well, because
I don't know in other places how many.
No, the other reason why I'm a little bit confused, because I'm reading from your report that the majority prepared. And it says here, it talks about in New York City, while a community outcry ultimately put a stop to New York City's plans. I'm trying to understand, does that mean it stopped, or is it still ongoing, or?
I think they announced they wanted to do it, and then there was an outcry in the community.
So right now, at least in New York City, because this is focused on New York City, I'm just trying to understand, is it your view that at this moment that no schools in New York City are doing this?
I don't know for certain that that's the case.
I know, but we're bringing a sense of Congress resolution to the floor decrying a practice that we want to end that may.
But we don't want it to happen in the future.
Well,
We don't want it to happen in the future.
but this doesn't do anything to prevent anything from happening in the future. I mean, this just basically, as you admitted, is a sense of Congress resolution, which is nothing more than our opinion.
But
Who cares?
But that doesn't mean that we could not do something after that. We can express
We could do
this-
anything. I just want to establish that this bill does nothing. I just want to make sure that I'm clear on this. That this bill does nothing. Mr. Scott, do you have any? I mean, does this bill do something that I don't understand here?
It's a resolution expressing an opinion without the force of law.
And normally we would bring them up under suspensions.
Most resolutions are brought up when suspensions aren't even marked up in committee.
Yeah, there must be some like secret committee within the Republican conference that sits around and tries to come up with creative, ways to drive wedges in our country or to, create issues where, quite frankly, they're not really issues. But I mean, the idea that we are in the Rules Committee bringing up a sense of Congress resolution, which is our opinion, for those who vote for it, that doesn't have the force of law, that doesn't provide any assistance for alternative housing, if in fact this practice is being used, that doesn't provide any assistance. There's an issue about learning loss, doesn't provide any additional assistance to schools where that may be an issue. I don't, Dr. Fox, am I missing something? Do you want to add anything? You're more than welcome.
No, sir.
Oh, okay. I thought you wanted to be recognized. Yeah, I mean, I think this is just another attempt to demonize immigrants, which my friends have become so gifted at. And it is so destructive and so unfair and such a waste of our time here. I'm trying to also, I mean, and as, you know, as I pointed out in my opening statement, Ranking Member Scott has also pointed out, I mean, we do have a problem when it comes to school safety with regard to guns. And silence on the other side. I shouldn't say silence. Last week we moved forward on a bill that would make it easier to kill people for people who want to do harm to students and to others in this country. I don't even, I mean, this is kind of a big nothing burger, with the exception of the fact that it adds to this anti-immigrant climate, which has been so destructive. It's not about a solution. It's about beating up on people. In many cases, people fleeing violence that none of us can possibly imagine. Does anyone have an opinion on governors who, without coordinating with other states, drop off migrants in those particular states? I mean, do you think that that's something that governors should do, Dr. Fox?
Well, that isn't the subject before us, and I haven't really given any thought to that.
Yeah, well, I mean,
I think one governor is being sued for dropping them off in Massachusetts.
yeah. All right.
Will the gentleman yield for a moment?
I'm happy to yield.
Well, look, my ask of Secretary Becerra and Secretary Mayorkas was, could we please let these small communities and small school districts know what is headed their way? And they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't answer the question. They wouldn't even dignify it with a response. So how could you be critical of my governor who's sending migrants to other cities and you say he's not notifying them? Hills Mills, Texas is not being notified.
Well, I'm referring to, it wasn't your governor, but I think it was the governor of Florida, who dropped off some, without any announcement, migrants in Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts. Now, our governor would have been happy to work with the governor of Florida to accommodate those migrants, because actually, you know, we don't spend all our time beating up on migrants, and we understand that the situations that many of them are fleeing are quite desperate. But again, this is just part of a string of cruelty that my friends on the Republican side have, you know, manufactured. And look, immigration is a serious issue. Dealing with the migrants who are coming into this country is a serious issue, and we need to deal with it. This is not. I mean, and this is creating the impression, well, an impression that, quite frankly, is not a reality. So anyway, well, it's good to see everybody, and, you know, we'll bring this up on the floor tomorrow. But again, I appreciate Dr. Fox reminding all of us that this bill does absolutely nothing, has no force of law, does absolutely nothing. And with that, I yield back my time.
I did not say that. I said the bill allows people to voice their opinions on the subject.
Yeah, well, I guess voicing opinions is a lot different than a bill that has the force of law that actually does something.
Well, there's a hell of a lot of voicing of opinions in this committee every day.
Well, I know, and I regret the fact that our side doesn't take up the lion's share of the voicing of opinions. But the bottom line is, this bill does nothing. I yield back.
Gentlelady from Minnesota is recognized for any questions she may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I have to mention, the ranking member, I was under the impression that we weren't to question people's motives, weren't to question our colleagues' motives. And
when did I question you?
well, Mr. Chair and ranking member, you said, you implied or said that there was a secret committee of the Republicans to just solely to think of ways to drive wedges. You also said that we were trying to demonize immigrants, and I
didn't single anybody out.
I'm sorry?
I didn't single any single, I didn't single.
No,
any
no,
single
but
person
you're,
out.
but the implication is, and I'm not saying it directly, but I'm just concerned that we are getting to that edge where we are questioning each other's motives. So I apologize if I've offended you, but I felt like I should say something because I was concerned as you went through that. But I appreciate it. But I did want to just say a couple of things. You know, Dr. Burgess mentioned the issues of the educational setbacks, and that is a concern if they're moving children or somehow displacing them while there's housing immigrants. But I did want to say that this is something that is a sense of Congress, and I appreciate the opportunity to be able to express my disapproval of this. When I think about the safety of the schools, you know, I'm not allowed in my grandchildren's schools. I can't just stop in and say hello. I have to have, you know, my daughter or my son have to put me on a list. I have to provide ID, the whole thing, just to have lunch with a grandchild or to visit with them. And I think that this really does get at the issue of safety concerns, because you have adults who are in the building and staying there. If the children are present, that's a real huge safety concern. So I think I appreciate the opportunity to express my disapproval of this practice. So thank you, and with that, I yield back.
Gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized for any questions she may have.
Thank you. There are so many problems with this resolution, it's really hard to know where to start. Maybe with the fact that it was introduced and moved through the wrong committee. The resolution seeks to condemn something that hasn't happened and could never happen based on the plain language of the first line of the resolution. Whereas sheltering aliens who are not admitted to the United States. You can't shelter someone who hasn't been admitted to the United States. I mean, that's just to start. It's nothing more than fear-mongering based on untruth after untruth or alternative fact, if that's how you prefer to call it. The ranking member's comments touched on the facts or lack of facts underlying this resolution. It references recent news reports about New York City considering the use of public school gyms to house asylum seekers, not aliens from Mars or anywhere else, who have been shipped to New York and other cities with Democratic administrations by grandstanding Republican governors using these migrants as political pawns. So this resolution contends first that 300 aliens were housed in New York City public schools on 2 days in May. The most basic Google search shows that the 300 migrant asylum seekers, they've filed for asylum, so they're legal, were housed in an abandoned school after 15 busloads of migrant seekers were dumped in New York by the Republican governors. And all the nonsense being espoused about safety of children, there's no there. No kids were adjacent to migrants being housed in public schools that were in use. Underlying all this nonsense, as usual, is either a fundamental lack of understanding about how our asylum system actually works or outright misrepresentations, and I leave it to whomever to figure out which it is. When migrant people arrive at our border and claim asylum, they have to meet certain basic requirements to file that legal claim. If they meet those requirements, they file their claim, they're given a hearing date and an opportunity to work through the legal process. If they can't meet those basic requirements, they're kicked out. They're immediately deported. So anyone who's allowed to file an asylum claim and then is placed on a bus to New York or any other destination has already been entered into the system and met that initial legal test. So the resolution's based on fiction. Even worse, it seeks to pull money from our already cash-strapped public schools by stirring up fear of an alien invasion that's going to threaten school children. It's fear-mongering, MAGA nonsense. It's not worthy of congressional consideration. It's a waste of time and taxpayer dollars, and I would urge the chair and majority members to exclude it from today's rule. It doesn't deserve to go to the floor. Ranking Member Scott, did you want to add anything?
I think you did a good job.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you. Gentleman from Texas, recognized for any questions he may have.
Yeah, I appreciate the chair. I mean, look, the reality is whether the merits of this resolution are particularly strong or not, the resolution is speaking to a larger problem. Like whatever the argument is about the specifics of the resolution, it's addressing a problem where you've got communities across the country, particularly Texas, dealing with a crisis almost entirely of this president's making. That's just what we're dealing with. And we're the ones dealing with it every single day, right? I mean, we get a new piece of news every single day of some other event, of something that's occurred in Texas. We had on Friday, Texas troopers stopped an illegal alien from Mexico possessing a handgun and cocaine while smuggling a dozen other illegals in Uvalde County bound for San Antonio. I could list off hundreds of examples I get on a regular basis. My phone is lighting up every week from sheriffs and people in Texas dealing with this all the time. Schools that have to put the big blocks up to deal with bailouts and trucks and people going across the properties, ranches, fences cut, livestock out, all the stuff. It's not fake, it's real. It's literally happening every day. My phone, pictures, I get pictures every day from Texans dealing with it. I mean, at some point, Texas is going to say, screw it, enough. We're going to do whatever the hell we want to do. And I'll be an advocate for that. Because the people in this Congress are ignoring the people of Texas. And by the way, the migrants getting abused. That's the truth. Talking about people who are admitted into this country, we're talking about the legal definition of admission, not the one app where you're processing people through a port of entry and just dumping them into the United States without having any idea when they return for a hearing on whether their asylum claim was legitimate in the first place, which it usually is not. That's the truth. Now, you can shake your head all you want. We're the ones holding the goddamn bag in Texas. It's true. Talk to the dead people in Texas. Yeah, good, walk out. You don't like the rants? We don't like what's happening to Texas because of you and the president down the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue. That's the truth.
Mr. Chair, the gentlelady from Minnesota made an issue about not getting personal. I would urge the chair to...
All right, I'll
speak
retract
to
to you, to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle.
And by the way, it's a small committee room. We don't have to scream.
Look, the fact of the matter is I have people dying in my state as a direct consequence of what this federal government fails to do. Kids in my district dying from fentanyl pouring into the community. Schools overrun, hospitals overrun. People trying to figure out how to deal with what is happening because the federal government refuses to do its basic duty. You want to talk about the migrants? You want to talk about the stash house in Fort Worth that I mentioned last week, where a federal judge is talking about the extent to which the man sitting in Baltimore was paying $1,000 to have his wife and daughter sent up, but he was being held hostage to $23,000 while his wife and daughter and the guy in the stash house is saying, I'm going to rape your daughter? And that's what the guy's being told right up here in Baltimore? And that's in a federal filing by a federal judge? Talking about, these are the facts. This is what we're talking about every single day. And you have federal judges now moving stuff up and saying we have to upward depart from the actual sentencing guidelines. Like, sit down and talk to the people and the sheriffs in South Texas who are having to deal with this every day, and it's absolute chaos. And the people in Texas are fed up. You talk about, well, what does the governor of Texas do? Or any other governor of Florida, dealing with what they're having to deal with the federal government failing to do its job? Of course they've got to deal with things like what's happening in schools and whether the schools are going to be used to house people because we have an entirely broken system. But it's completely insane to ignore what's actually happening to the people of this country and the migrants in question. That's what absolutely and utterly blows my mind. I know the chairwoman agrees about what's happening and seeing what's happening to migrants across the country. The 856 dead migrants last year, the thousands of Americans dying from fentanyl, all of the things we've talked about. They're real. These are real human beings. It's not fake what the federal judge put in an order just 2 weeks ago. It's not fake. It's real. And it's a product of a completely broken system in which we refuse to actually secure the border of the United States, which is our fundamental job, and have the Secretary of Homeland Security come before the committee and say, yes, we have operational control of the border, which he did. He looked me in the eye in the House Judiciary Committee and said, yes, we have operational control of the border. And then testifying in front of a Senate committee months later, he said, oh no, not according to the definition of the Secure Fence Act. Nobody has control under that definition. Well, which is it? I had literally the statute sitting behind me telling you don't have operational control of the border. You say, well, this resolution doesn't matter. Well, this resolution is another effort to try to say, look, there are consequences to the communities around this country. That's the problem. You have 50 states, thousands of communities who are left holding the bag. And then we hear things like, oh, don't worry, people admitted. Well, they're admitted by definition because they got into the country. That's absurd. There's 3,000 to 4,000 a day right now being apprehended, while somewhere similar to that number, although we don't have the most recent data because it changes by the week, and you have to go ask them, probably 3,000 to 4,000 coming through the one app. But it's like pulling teeth to get data out of the administration. But we know there's thousands either being shoved through the ports of entry through the one app or thousands being apprehended between the ports of entry while fentanyl continues to pour into our country. So yes, we have resolutions that are from committees that aren't directly in the jurisdiction, for example, the Homeland Security or Judiciary, because this is touching every aspect of our life. And we have things like schools that are having to deal with it. I don't know if the gentlelady has anything to add to that.
Well, I thank you for expressing the concerns that you have from the state of Texas, but it certainly isn't just the state of Texas that's concerned. I do want to say for the record that the phrase aliens not admitted is the legal language to describe those not legally admitted to the United States. This came up as an issue a few minutes ago. So I think it's important that we make sure that when we do a resolution, that we use the appropriate language, whether some people think the resolution does anything or not. We're determined at least to use the proper language. And I thank the gentleman for his spirited defense of doing the right thing in our country. Thank you.
I thank the gentlelady. The people of Texas are past the point of being able to accept what we're getting out of the federal government. Well past the point. I yield back.
The gentlelady from New Mexico is recognized for any questions she may have.
Thank you so much, Chairman, for the recognition. And I would just note that this non-binding resolution does not address in any way all the things that our colleague, who is now leaving, yelled about for the last 7 minutes, because it does not address fentanyl. This Congress has refused to address fentanyl. It has not addressed immigration. This Congress, the Republicans have refused to address immigration reform. What it does do, though, is express an opinion that I believe is contrary to Americans' basic sense of decency and humanity. Our basic humanity, our asylum laws, and Scripture all guide us to be better than this. In the New Testament, Matthew says, I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. Deuteronomy. The Old Testament counsels that you shall also love the stranger, for you were once strangers in Egypt. America's asylum and refugee laws were written after World War II, when we turned back to St. Louis carrying 937 Jews seeking refuge from the Holocaust. We know what happened to most of them. So I am very saddened that today we take up this non-binding resolution, which, as the chairwoman has said, is a priority of the majority. This is a priority of the Republican majority. And the language says it is necessary to keep children safe. Let's talk about safety. Last week, Republicans passed a bill to allow people to use high-powered weapons with shoulder braces without enhanced background checks and safety regulations. Ranking Member Scott, remind us once again, What is the biggest killer of school children in America?
Firearms.
Firearms.
Firearms, and if we're going to talk about school safety, you got to talk about guns.
You got to talk about guns, but we're not really talking about guns. What I'd also point out is the manner in which it does target immigrants. Undocumented immigrants toil in the hot sun to pick the food that we eat. They take on the hardest, most dangerous jobs in the slaughterhouses, caring for our elders, caring for our children. They build our houses in the hottest places, in the most dangerous places. They fill in the gaps. Indeed, more than 5 million undocumented immigrants, including more than half of all DACA recipients and the majority of TPS holders, are considered essential critical infrastructure workers. America does not work without immigrants. When I meet with contractors, ranchers, home builders, and so many others, they want us to get immigration reform done. But that's not what we're doing today. We are honoring Immigration Heritage Month with this mean-spirited, non-binding resolution. And before I close, I want to talk about another example about how schools serve as shelter. Last year, during New Mexico's largest wildfire, schools opened up their gyms to those fleeing the fire. We know that this happens across the country in hurricanes and disaster after disaster. Those who vote for this resolution would give their opinion in support of taking funding away from those schools if there were any undocumented among those sleeping on those cots, saddened by the conditions they find themselves in. That is what this resolution expresses an opinion about. Our students, our nation, we are better than this. We are a moral people, and we know we should be better. And with this, I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for any questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, after hearing my friends on the other side of the aisle talk about how, the immigration issue has not been solved, and can sit there with a straight face and say that, this is humane to let everybody from every country come in, and it helps the workforce, is just really not living in the real world. You tell that mother and that father who've lost young ones from fentanyl that's pouring in across the border. You tell that police officer that when he arrests that illegal with illegal drugs, and they themselves are subject to not only contamination with the fentanyl, but not knowing what background the person that they're stopping has, whether he's a murderer, whether he's a pedophile, doesn't matter. It's insane what's happening with this administration and what they're doing. And it's purely intentional, and it's for political reasons. It could not be anything else. That's why they're getting driver's licenses. That's why they're getting put on the public payroll. And the fact that we've got a vice president who's still laughing at it, the fact we've got a president who really hadn't been to the border, that really shows the damage that's being done. I don't know how you walk it back. To let probably anywhere from 5 to 10 million before this administration is out of office, hopefully. We are a nation of immigrants, but it's legal immigration. It's not illegal immigration. And it's just not being done, and America will long pay a price for what's happening in this country. So Chips, I heard just a portion of it. He expresses just the outrage that many of us have, that is entirely avoidable, as it was under the Trump administration. And now it's a tragedy. The country is going to take a long time if it can recover. And we're just in two different universes with my good friends from the other side of the aisle, and those of us who think we're a nation of borders, we're a sovereign nation, or we were at one time. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Gentleman from New York is recognized for any questions he may have.
Chairwoman Fox, some folks on the other side of the aisle have decried this resolution as a pointless waste of time. Do you agree with that?
I do not. We spent time in the committee to hear it, and I'm bringing it to rules, and we're going to bring it to the floor. And I'm very sensitive about waste of time.
No, thank you, Dr. Fox. I don't agree with that either. And as a sole member of this committee who represents the state that inspired this resolution, any action by Congress to oppose what President Biden, Governor Hochul, and Mayor Adams are doing is absolutely welcome. In fact, 5 of the 7 counties in my district have declared a state of emergency, citing a lack of resources to handle this massive influx of migrants. The southern tier of New York is not urban, it's not wealthy. What President Biden, Governor Hochul, and Mayor Adams are doing here is placing an unbearable strain on the resources of communities. Chairwoman Fox, do you think it's compassionate to the American people to foist an economic burden onto the backs of communities that struggle to afford basic services?
I do not think it's compassionate.
I agree with you as well. As you know, reports have shown that HHS lost contact with more than 85,000 migrant children brought to this country illegally in the last 2 years and then relocated into the interior. Only 37% of these unaccompanied minors have ended up in the care of their own parents. Ranking Member Scott, do you think that losing track of 85,000 unaccompanied minors is compassionate?
When Secretary Becerra testified before the committee, he said that they were not missing, that they were placed appropriately, and the...
I mean, I'll listen to cries for... I'll take my time back. I'll take my time back.
HHS loses jurisdiction.
I'll take my time back. I'll listen to cries for compassion from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle when they, along with the administration, secure the actual border. We've seen the results of the Biden administration's failure to uphold our laws and leave our borders wide open. Crime has skyrocketed. Fentanyl's killing thousands of Americans. Human beings, including young children, are being trafficked across our border and into the interior as this administration loses track of them. And now our communities, like those in Cattaraugus and Chautauqua counties in New York State, are now seeing their resources stretched to the breaking point to deal with an influx of illegal immigrants. None of this is compassionate. None of this is humane. I strongly support this resolution, and I am a proud co-sponsor of what I believe is one of the many steps our Republican majority is taking to return sanity to our border and force this administration to once and for all uphold our immigration laws, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Any additional comments or questions?
I do, but I'll hold them.
God bless you, Mr. Ranking Member. With that, I want to thank both the chairman and the ranking member for their patience and good humor being with us today, and our witnesses are excused.
Thank you very much, Mr.